Welcome back to This Week in Video Games, and I am here with Dave Gilbert from Wadjet Eye Games, and we're here to talk about Unavowed, amongst other things. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
I've spoken to a lot of people over the last 12 months about adventure games, and Unavowed kept coming up, and so I had to play it. And I understand that it's about a year since Unavowed came out. Is that right?
Almost to the day. It's right now. I assume this will go up later. It's August 5th. It came out August 8th last year, so almost exactly 1 year ago.
Oh, fantastic. Well, happy anniversary.
Right on. A year ago, if you had spoken to me exactly 1 year ago, I would have been feeling a lot more stressed out.
So could you tell our listeners a little bit more about Unavowed?
Sure. The elevator pitch is that it starts with your exorcism. You've been possessed by a demon for a year, and while you were possessed, you did all sorts of naughty things, really horrible things, actually. And the main goal of the game is that you have to you join this supernatural investigatory, I guess that's the word, a supernatural investigation group called the Unavowed, and the goal is to try to find out what your demon did while you were possessed and fix it.
So what was your inspiration behind Unavowed?
Many, many, many things. There's two inspirations. One is like the gameplay aspect of it, and another is the story aspect of it. The gameplay, I was always very inspired and loved the mid-era BioWare, I guess you could call it, like from the first Knights to the Old Republic to, I guess, the first Mass Effect, like before EA took over. The whole definitely had a kind of a formula where you created your character and you'd go out on missions, and you can choose which companion characters to go out with you, and depending on who you chose, there were subtle changes in how things went. They'd react to things in different ways. They would change your tactics in combat, but what I decided to do instead was have them change tactics, or rather change how you'd solve various puzzles through the game. So I've always liked that kind of mechanic, and I always wanted to make a game like that. And I finally did that with Unavowed. And in terms of story, I've always been into urban fantasy. I was always really inspired by the Dresden Files. I'm a huge fan of that. Stuff like Hellblazer, World of Darkness, Buffy, most recently The Magician, stuff like that. I adore urban fantasy, so I've always wanted to make a urban fantasy game, and I finally did.
I was wondering, when you start a project like the Unavowed, do you have a set of design principles in mind, or do you kind of see where it goes throughout development?
Bit of column A, bit of column B. I always have a vague idea of what I want, and it always changes. I'm always second guessing myself constantly, and so I'm always reevaluating what I'm doing and thinking about it and really making sure it's something I really, really like and I'm happy with before I move on. So, but the longer something stays in your head, the more you get sick of it. So that's where the danger kind of is that I come up with a great idea, but if it sits in my head for long enough, I'll begin to hate it and think it sucks. So the trick is to kind of work around those neuroses and get something out before my brain can tell me it's awful.
When I was playing the game, I felt an immediate connection to the characters, and really, I absolutely love the game. How do you go about eliciting an emotive reaction from your audience and find that connection?
There's no rhyme or reason, really. I just know that in order to create that connection with the audience, I need to create the connection myself. If I am connected to these characters, then that is the foundation that I can build the connection to the audience. Like if I'm not connected or I have empathy with these characters that I'm creating, then I can't take that to the next step. Because if I'm faking it, you'll be able to tell. But if I genuinely like the characters, then that's how I make you genuinely like them as well. Because you can't fake that. And so before I can do that, I put myself in a position where I have to like the characters and want to spend time with them and want to learn more about them and get to know them along with the audience. So that is where it's a bit esoteric, but that's where I always start from. Like if I like the characters, then I know I can spend time with them.
You mentioned the characters there, and there's a rich cast of characters in the game. How do you go about designing them and bringing them to life?
I mean, mostly they're different. They're kind of different aspects of my personality. I guess the one I bring back this empathy thing is the one character that people genuinely seem to like the most was Eli, and I guess because he's the closest to me. You know, I'm a dad. He's a dad. I'm kind of like I'm very much like I could get into his head very easily because he's the most like me. Vicky is just me with no filter. Just like whatever I want to say that I shouldn't, I just give that line to Vicky, and that's just her. Mandana has a lot of my like love of New York and New York history and the weird thing, quirky things about the city. Whenever people profess their love and talking about New York, I give that to Mandana. Logan was maybe the hardest for me to reach. But for him, it was always about, I guess I have a bit of an addictive personality, which is why I'm into video games. So there's a bit of that in there. I'd say of the four, I connected with Logan the least. And he's the one that people often say is the least developed. And I do kind of agree. He got, of all the four, he was probably the least developed. But I did have a lot of fun with him, especially his interactions with KK. I guess what I try to do is that I try to find different aspects of my own personality or thoughts or whatever that I want to give a voice to, and then I create a character around that.
And with the range of characters, and I guess specifically the number of characters you've got in your party, what kind of design challenges did that pose you?
Honestly, the challenge was more the extra time that it took. The thing about Unavowed is that it doesn't do anything that I hadn't already done. It's just there was a lot more of it. I knew I could design, a mission. The thing that Unavowed did that I hadn't done before was that I had to design 5 missions, depending on, there were 5 unique party combinations, and I wanted each of them to be unique and interesting. So I had to do everything I had to do 5 times. And that was the challenge, just the extra time that it took to just get everything done. All the extra testing, all the extra asset creation, that kind of stuff. So the challenge was there was nothing I hadn't already done before. It just took more time and, more money and more asset creation, that kind of stuff. So from a pure design level, I could do it all. It was just a lot more of it.
And when you start the game, you offer the player the opportunity to pick their name and their backstory. What's the benefits to you as a designer for that kind of blank slate character?
Well, a number of things. Mainly that I knew that the main character was going to be unvoiced, and when I made that decision, it enabled me to add a lot of extra things. I was able to have a lot of that character customization that I couldn't have with a voiced character, because that meant I would have. I mean, the main character by itself would easily be would have tripled the voice acting budget just for one of the genders. Adding the second gender on top of that level of complexity would have just gone that much farther. But removing the voice acting from the main character enabled me to create all of that extra stuff. And if you're going to have a blank slate character, the best thing you can do is to just lean into that as much as possible. So I wanted to have the 2 genders. I wanted to have the origin stories, and I wanted to have I wanted you to be able to play however you wanted to play it. And have the character be a blank slate that you could superimpose yourself on. And the challenge of that was that all of the characters surrounding you had to kind of pick up the slack in terms of having strong characters to pal around with. Because your character was very blank, very deliberately. I had to make sure that the characters you palled around with were interesting enough to make that, to kind of make up for it.
And with the backstories, you've got the choice of being an actor or a cop or a bartender. Does that introduce a bit more complexity to the game as well?
Yeah, very much so. I had to keep track of all that stuff, and it kind of came up in various superficial ways. But my favorite part of this was kind of lifted directly from a game called Dragon Age Origins. I don't know if you've played that one, but it enabled you to do the origin thing, which is why I assume it was called Dragon Age Origins. And there were a whole bunch of them. And both me and my wife played the game at the same time, and we both took different origins. And what was amazing is that like we'd go through the game and like she would find a character from my origin that didn't recognize her character and vice versa. And it was very rewarding to go through this game and see, oh wow, like this happened because I made this choice at the beginning of the game. And that was incredibly rewarding. And I wanted to do that a lot with the origin stories, how there were certain things that happened throughout the game that would only have happened if you chose that one origin story. And I found a lot of people found that very rewarding, especially when they played a second time and they saw just how deep the rabbit hole went. And I was very happy that I pulled that off.
So I chose the actor for my first playthrough. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back, and maybe next time
the actor is probably the one that I wouldn't say like the least. It's the one that I had to cut an element from it, because originally there was another companion character, and each of the origin stories was going to have, one of the companion characters that you met. If you were a bartender, you would have met Logan. If you were a cop, you would have met Vicky. And the actor origin, originally Calliope, the Muse, she was going to be a companion character. So that would have been the benefit of choosing actor. But since I decided that the game was getting too complex and I had to cut one of the companion characters, the actor was probably maybe slightly less satisfying than the others, which, sorry about that.
You tantalized me. It makes me want to go back even more.
Awesome.
So I understand as well. You kind of tested early on. You made the prologue and then had a round of testing. What were the benefits of that testing to you? And did you make any adjustments after that?
Some, yeah. The benefit was, of course, I was able to get eyes on it very early, because it was it was a new kind of game in several ways. Like the unvoiced protagonist was a big thing that was very different. I wanted to make sure that people enjoyed it, that they thought it was fun, that they, liked the characters. The character of Mundana was a lot nastier in the first few drafts. She was a lot meaner, and the testers at the early stages remarked on that. They're like, I don't like her. She's mean. And I lightened her up a lot. I made her a lot less taciturn. And so I was able to kind of workshop the character that way. Stuff like that. And also I was able to determine what worked and what didn't. There was a bit more, in the first mission had a bit more to it that ended up being very superfluous and no one liked it. So I got rid of it and that kind of stuff. So testing early enables you to get to those points a lot quicker. Learning when something sucks at the beginning is a lot better than learning it sucks at the end.
And we mentioned before, so we're nearly a year to the day since Unavowed came out. How do you reflect on the game's first year?
No one's more surprised than me at how well it did. I am so happy. I mean, it is our runaway bestseller. It's done incredibly well. It's still being talked about. It was nominated for an IGF, which had never happened before. That was really, really cool. It still sells really well a year later. And people still are doing fan art. Some people do cosplay of the characters once in a while, which I find amazing. I couldn't really ask for more. I am very happy with its reception. I'm glad people like it. It's hard to know how to follow that up. So it's been great. It's been great. I'm very happy. I'm very happy with how it's turned out.
Well, it's an absolutely fantastic game, and like I said, I've been speaking to a lot of people, be players of adventure games or creators of adventure games over the last 6 to 9 months, and they all recommended me play Unavowed. And
I'm glad. Word of mouth is the best way that an indie like me, especially an indie, niche who works in such a small niche. It's the only way like we stay in business is through word of mouth like that. So I'm very grateful.
So for those who don't know, how can players get hold of Unavowed?
Well, you can get it on Steam. You can get it on our website, wadjeteyegames.com. That's Wadjet with a J. It's on GOG, and it's also now on the Xbox Pass for Windows. It just went up there.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I definitely recommend it. So if you haven't played Unavowed, drop what you're doing right now. Go out there and get it.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I want to shift slightly from Unavowed to Wadjet Eye Games.
Sure.
And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your process for coming up with games.
Beats the hell out of me. Honestly, like people ask, so do you have like a software to keep track of things, or what do you use for note taking? And I'm like, Notepad? I don't know. Honestly, no one's more surprised than me that I've stayed in business this long, because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I never have. I know I sound so professional. It's just banging my head against a wall until something happens. I just take notes. I just write things down, and eventually something coalesces. And I think, yeah, I can work with this. And I just sort of workshop it and fiddle with it, noodle around with my head. I let it sit there. And if I still like it at the end of the day, then I move forward until I get to the point where I'm pretty much committed. That's sort of the trick, is like I have to, since games take so long to make, I have to be very sure that it's something that I can stick with for a long period of time. If it's an idea that I can't really get behind, or I'm not happy with, and I'm sort of stuck and committed to it for several years, I'm going to be miserable. So above all, I want to make sure it's something that I'm very happy with and something that I'm excited to be working on.
You mentioned there it takes quite some time to make games. Could you tell us a little bit more about the different phases of designing a game like Unavowed? I was thinking, for example, the separation between writing, art, and development.
Well, fortunately, I have an artist who takes care of all that for me, and we work very close together. Often, sometimes his designs inspire something. I think Eli's fire reading actually came from a quick animation he did, kind of just for fun. I wanted an idle animation for Eli, and I thought, maybe he's like juggling fireballs or something. And Ben decided, no, that's too clownish. Let's do this. And he had him like levitating this fiery ball. And then I saw that. I'm like, that's interesting. What exactly is he doing? And I came up with the idea of fire reading from that. And it was this wonderful synergy of back and forth. Often a lot of that works in tandem. And of course, the writing and design often go hand in hand. I often write the dialogue to try to get a feel for the scene and try to work out how, will this work? How will the dialogue in this section work, or what have you? Often they go in tandem. I try to make sure the narrative and the story is the key thing. So I want the narrative and the design to kind of feed into each other. There's always a high level aspect and a low level. There's always okay, the high level is the feeling that I want you to get from it. Here's what I want to achieve. Here's what I want you to feel and think after you play it. And all the low level stuff is, okay, how do I get you there? And those are the individual mechanics and actions and things like that. So the high level stuff is the low level stuff is easy to change. The high level stuff is not. So I'll spend a lot of time trying to think of the high level stuff. What do I want you to get? What do I want you to come away with after you've played a section or a chapter or an entire game or an entire series? I try to think about that stuff. And then once I nail that, I can work on all the low level stuff to get you there. And it's often that high level stuff that's the bottleneck most of the time, is thinking of the big picture of what it is that I want to achieve in the first place. And often that's the bottleneck. Once I break through that, the rest of it just kind of happens. It's some magic thing that happens, but it's determining that high level stuff that's always the sticking point for me. It's always where I'm stuck. It's always where I'm most frustrated. It's always when, I'm the worst person to live with, that kind of stuff. So, hopefully that answers your question.
What what would you say are the benefits of being an independent company in the video games space?
Well, I guess that I can take that time and kind of approach things the way I want to approach them without anyone telling me what to do. I guess maybe if I did have that oversight, maybe that would push me to like get this stuff done a little faster. But I don't. If you ask any of my previous bosses for any other job I had, they'll all probably tell you I never liked being told what to do, and it's so this job suits me well because I can make my own choices and I can really make what I want to make. And at the end of the day, that's why I do this, because I'm making what I want to be playing. I'm making the kind of games that I want to see out there, and no one can tell me that I can't. Except, if people don't buy the games, then that'll be my answer. But the main benefit of being indie is that, I can do whatever I want, and it's wonderful.
And it must make you really proud when something that you've worked on for X number of years, you're really passionate about it, you love it, and then you release it into the world, and everyone else loves it as well, just like Unavowed. So it must make you really proud.
Yes, it does. And the fear is that like the way the market is now, I don't know if you've heard the term indie-pocalypse, but it's definitely a thing. Mm-hmm. There's always the fear that regardless of how good the game is, and even even when I was at my most frustrated with the game, I knew it was good. I knew I had a good game. I liked it a lot, but would that be enough? And that's always the fear, that regardless of how good it is, how well it's reviewed, that people just won't play it because there's so many other things out there. And that's the hard thing about being an indie now, is that you're competing with everyone else. You're competing with not just the new games that are coming out, but every game that ever existed, because they're all available on Steam right now. And so it's very hard to break through that noise. And I'm so grateful that I did, that Unavowed managed to get through and reach people. I'm so grateful and so happy. How I did that, I couldn't tell you. I'm just a combination of luck and, I have a following on social media now, people evangelizing the game, like all the folks that you interviewed. I'm so grateful to all of these things that enabled the game to get out there the way it has. So I'm able to stay in business and make more of them. I'm more grateful than I can say.
And so Unavowed came out about a year ago. So you must be in the process of coming up with something new.
Yeah, very slowly, very, very slowly.
And so if you can, and I understand if you can't, could you give us a glimpse of what's next for Wadjet Eye Games?
Well, we're working on a few things. I don't know how much you know about my company, but we do publishing as well as developing. I sometimes work with other developers to get their game out. The big thing right now is Nighthawks, which is being written by a guy named Richard Cobbett, who's a former journalist and a good friend of mine, an amazing writer. He's done work on stuff like The Long Journey Home and Not Tonight and a bunch of things. And he approached me with this idea, with a vampire game, actually, a kind of a Sunless Sea meets Vampire Bloodlines thing, and it's really good. He had a Kickstarter for that last year, and then approached me about publishing it, and I said okay. So we've been working on that, and that's been going very well. Very slowly, we're working on a sequel to 2005's Technobabylon with James Dearden. He's working on that. And I personally am working on something that I haven't entirely nailed down yet. So I don't feel comfortable saying anything about it right now.
Oh, that's all good. Yeah, it's a tantalizing nugget of information there. And I wanted to shift a little bit from your company to you, Dave. And I was wondering, how did you get into the games industry in the first place?
How did I get into it? Well, I would say the origin isn't the happiest story. It was 2001. It was September, and I live in New York. You know what was going on back then.
Yes.
I had been laid off from this awful corporate job, And that all happened. I kind of was, obviously thinking a lot, feeling a lot of feelings, and was trying to find a way to vent and just sort of work my way through it creatively. And I discovered Adventure Game Studio, and I made a little game in the system, and I put it on this forum, the Adventure Game Studio forum, and people seemed to like the game. So I made more of them. And about 5 years later, in 2006, I decided that I enjoyed it too much to do anything else for a living. And I thought I have money saved up. I'm going to try selling them now. And I did. Released the first game I sold was a game called The Shiva, and I've been doing it ever since. It's now 13 years later, and I'm still doing it.
Do you have any advice for aspiring game developers?
I will say start small if you can. I mean, I always hate this question because all of my advice is 13 years out of date. Because I know what I did. I started small and kind of organically grew. But that was like 13 years ago when there were so few games available. And the indie scene was very, very small. So what worked for me back then doesn't necessarily work now. And so I never know what to say. I will say that like social media is very key. Like make sure if you're not talking about your game, start talking about your game. Like if you need to be excited about it and make that infectious. And because people can see insincerity. And if you're insincere, like no one's going to believe that. No one's going to like want to be involved with your stuff. So you definitely need to sell yourself a lot more than you did back when I first started. And above all, you have to love what you're doing. I would say love what you're doing, because if you don't, what's the point of doing it?
Well, that's great advice. And you touched on it there, and the games industry it's changed so much over the last 5 years, with the emergence of things like streaming video games, YouTube and Twitch, etc. What has the biggest change been that you've seen that's kind of improved your life as a game developer?
The biggest thing that's improved my life? That's a good question. In the last 5 years, or just in general?
Or just in general, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, the fact that Twitter is like the best thing for marketing. I just tweet about something and like I can just push stuff on Twitter, and usually the word gets out because I've kind of organically grew, my followers or whatever you call it, over the decade I've been in business. And so at this point, like it's the best way to reach the fans and to kind of reach more fans. So social media and that kind of stuff has been a huge boon for me, and being able to do what I do. It's just so great that I can just, tweet something and then like PC Gamer writes about it. It's insane. I did a jam game about 2 months ago, and I wrote about it on Twitter, and PC Gamer wrote about it. Like that never happened. That never happened before. Stuff like that. Like, so I love that. That has been a huge boon for me. The fact that the barrier to entry is a lot lower, but the sheer amount of competition is significantly higher. So there's also that. It's a double-edged sword. Like when I first started, the difficulty was getting on Steam. Like it was getting noticed, and getting on Steam was like the hugest, like the biggest hurdle. Once you were on Steam, like before, like 2013 or so, if you got on Steam, that was like, you were set, because you were on that front page of Steam for like several weeks and you were set. Now it's easy to get on Steam, but the hardship now is to get noticed on Steam. So like same coin, different side, I guess. So with every leap forward in terms of like lowering the barrier to entry, there's always a step backward, because the easier it becomes, the more people are doing it. So now the fact that I'm fiddling with Unity now, and I was able to make a 3D game in Unity for the Jam in 2 weeks is amazing. But that also means that anyone else could do it too, and so I'm competing with them.
Is there anything out there at the moment, be it another video game or something else in entertainment, that inspires you?
I mean, there's various authors that I like, and just the way they craft stories has always been a huge inspiration. Someone like Lawrence Block or Jim Butcher or Terry Pratchett. I kind of adore the way they approach characters and stories, and just the way they structure things. It's hard to say. I've been kind of very. There's a number of narrative games I played over the last year. I kind of got into a bunch of these narrative-based games like Oxenfree and Gone Home and Firewatch, and I've been playing them. And what's sort of fascinating about them is how they take all the rules that I've written for myself and they set them on fire. Like, they just break all of the rules that I've made for what makes a game good, and the games are still incredibly engaging. And seeing how they break all those rules has been kind of amazing. And so that's been kind of fascinating for me, and seeing how I kind of can work that into my own work, and seeing what I can create from that.
Do you have much time to play games these days?
I try to. A few hours maybe at night if I'm feeling up to it after we put the kid to bed. I still go through games. I just go through them a lot slower than I used to. I'm currently playing Subnautica, and I'm digging that one. It's what I love about it is that it's a kind of open worldish crafting survival game, but it's handcrafted. Like, there is nothing procedurally generated about it, which I really like, because when I find something, it feels like an experience that was created for me, and I enjoy that a lot.
Have you come across the Outer Wilds at all?
I hear it's really good, but I have not. I've haven't gotten around to it yet. I hear it's very, very hard to get into, but once it clicks, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's something that that kind of came out of nowhere for me. I heard about it, and it really got its kind of hooks into me. So if you get any time over the next few months, I recommend that one.
Sure, yeah, that's definitely on the list.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today about Unavowed, your company, and about yourself and your experience. I really appreciate that you taking the time to talk to us on This Week in Video Games.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for talking to me.